Hello, and welcome to the Cashbased Practice Podcast, a production of drjarodcarter.com, aimed at giving physical therapists and other healthcare practice owners the information needed for success in the private pay business model. And now, here's your host, Jarod Carter.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining me. This is a highlights episode of the podcast where we've gone through past episodes to extract the stories, the strategies, and the topics that we feel really bear repeating to give you the best chance for success in the out-of-network private pay business model. As always, I want to thank my sponsors of the podcast, Patient Sites, not just for being loyal sponsors all these years, but for what they've done for my own private practice. I really appreciate it, guys. Check them out at patientsites.com. If you are interested in this practice model, which obviously you are, there's some must-know information in a free 2-hour in-depth training that I've hosted at drjarodcarter.com/the8keys. You can go to that webpage and pick a time that works for you to take in all that information and apply it to your current or future practice. And of course, if you have appreciated anything about this podcast, gotten anything from it, even just inspiration, please hop over to iTunes and leave an honest review, and I would deeply appreciate it. So with all that said, thank you again so much always for joining me, and here is this week's episode highlight.
Let's start with once you start a cash practice and it starts to grow, how do you bring on people and make them part of your company instead of them saying, well, why don't I just do this myself?
Okay. So I think that, for one, it all begins by, as you're doing now, a lot of pre-planning and starting with the end in mind. So long before anyone out there who starts a cash practice decides to scale up and start to add staff, my suggestion would be that as you're starting out, even if you don't think that you might go in that direction and you're just happy to keep a solo practice, you keep a few things in mind. One, you might find that you have to go in that direction just to give your hands a rest, to give your body a rest, to be able to make money when you're not there treating patients. Because, unless you save really aggressively, you're going to need to be making money for many years before retirement. So start with the end in mind that it might be possible that you're going to have to scale up at some point. And so what I mean by that is, with your website and with the way you interact with patients all along, try not to make it so much about you, but make, the way you craft your text online on your website or on social media, not using I, but using us and we, things like that, so that you build kind of a brand identity that, your patients know that you're the only one there at the moment treating patients, but that, there's a sense that this is a business and a company that is broader than just you as that individual. So that's one piece of advice I'd give to people, starting out or looking at potentially starting a cash practice. The other thing is that and something that I'm trying to implement now that I wish I would have done more along the way in terms of like starting with the end in mind, or starting with the idea that and moving forward with the idea that, I'm probably going to be trying to scale this up a bit at some point, is to really document along the way all the systems and procedures that you use on a daily basis for everything to do with the business. So right now, I'm spending a ton of time just documenting via text documents or with video all the different things that I've been doing over the last 6 years now, so that I can pass that information on to my physical therapist that I just hired. So if I had along the way been compiling that information, my workload now would be so much less. And I think the transition and the ramping up of any new employee would be so much easier when you can kind of sit them down in front of some documents and say, okay, whenever you're going to spend a lot of time watching me in the clinic and spending time while I'm treating patients, but you're also going to spend a lot of your kind of onboarding time reading these 50 documents and watching these 50, videos and then answering these questions. And so you know that anyone coming in is going to have a really firm idea of exactly how you like things done. Getting on to that final segment of the question of how, and tell me if I'm right, you were saying how do you scale up without people doing, how do you scale up period, or how do you scale up without people going and doing their own thing?
Well, both. How do you entice somebody or share your vision that they want to be part of making cash, being part of the cash model versus them saying, well, if I'm doing it anyway, why not just do it myself?
Right. So I think that part of that goes to, I mean, it's not hard to sell, excuse me, the idea of the cash-based model being great. Selling a physical therapist on the idea of, hey, would you like to work in a setting where you're going to have a full hour one-on-one with every patient and, a quarter of the documentation. That part is the easy sell. But getting to what you implied of, well, if someone is good enough to thrive in that model, why wouldn't they just do it on their own? And I think that for some people, they are going to do it on their own. Some people are naturally not just entrepreneurial, and I think that you and I fall in this category, but simply like we take, not offense to, but we just don't feel right deep down in our belly if we're not doing our own thing, if we don't have at least one source of revenue that's not based on an employer doing their job,
Right.
And so if you hire someone like that, they're, at some point they're probably going to do their own thing, and that is one of those things that it happens. I did it myself, and I know a number of other people who did. And even if you get outside of the cash-based realm, if we just kind of drop whether it's cash-based or insurance, wouldn't that same question kind of apply to any private practice, where if someone is truly entrepreneurial and a go-getter and really wants to have their own thing someday, if any practice hires that person, once they learn the ropes, and get a bit of a following, they're probably going to move on and in that direction. And I would say at that point, it's kind of more of I don't know that it would be possible to fully identify that in the hiring process and just avoid hiring someone like that. I mean, but maybe you look at their track record or ask certain questions to see, where their comfort levels are. I mean, a lot of, on the other end of the spectrum, people may be different than you or I, or a lot of people listening to this podcast, feel really uncomfortable with the idea of not having a paycheck and benefits or just a steady job. For some people, there's so much comfort in that, and they don't have necessarily a huge drive to do their own thing, that if you're paying as well or even better than they could get somewhere else, but then you're offering this nice scenario of, hey, a lot less paperwork, a lot more one-on-one time. You get to treat how you want to treat, where, I'm going to do my best to fill your schedule with your ideal patient, the niche that you really enjoy. Those are all the kind of things that I'm promising to my current PT and any future PTs. And I think that if I'm able to identify and hire really great clinicians who maybe don't have a huge entrepreneurial drive and are happy just making good money in a nice setting, that I do think that I'm going to be able to scale my practice as big as I want it to be. I don't have aspirations of having, 10 plus clinics, but I mean, I have no doubt that I'm going to be able to do 3 or 4 clinicians plus me occasionally seeing patients. That's not even a question in my mind. Some of those may eventually move on. And if they do, then that's, so be it. I just have to deal with that and actually try to do my best to support them. I mean, a lot of times I actually had a a conversation about this with a patient, I get the best advice from patients. I have a lot of patients who are entrepreneurs, and we always just talk business. We just sit there for an hour. I'm working on them. We're talking business. It's great. And one of them is a very successful entrepreneur, and especially in the restaurant area. And I mean, probably 50% of the really high level restaurants in Austin have at some point worked within some of his restaurants. So he's had a ton of people move on and do their own thing. And he said, in the beginning, I used to fight it and it would piss me off. And what I found was if I turned and did a 180 and now I support them and I try to be a reference, or not a reference, a mentor. And I found that it's the end result is so much better in terms of just good relationships and opportunities that arise, and maybe even partnerships down the road, and all kinds of stuff. So he said, if you ever have anyone move on, do your best to, if they're not, just blatantly doing, doing bad things, or talking badly about your business, but if they're moving on good terms, try to support them. And I know that sounds probably kind of funny to many people out there listening, but I know that fighting it, especially if they're not doing anything like, blatantly to steal business. I mean, people are going to follow good clinicians wherever they go, right? But if they're not doing any kind of any bad practices, then I think that trying to keep it on good terms and supporting them in any way you can is a good thing. And to speak, and I'm just kind of rambling on this one question, but it's a big topic. One of the ways that I am trying to kind of buffer that scenario, or, if that happens, or when it happens, if it ever does, one of the things I'm doing now is I'm working on exactly what I mentioned before with systems, on setting up systems, marketing systems that are not completely based on that particular clinician being there, or having good relationships or doing the right thing, but actually drawing in a ton of patients, or just as many patients as needed to fill that spot that clinician is going to vacate very, very quickly. So, in other words, if someone leaves, I'll still have all the systems. If someone leaves and they take, a number of patients follow them, it's not that going to be as big a deal to me, because I have so many other kind of irons in the fire that are generating business for new patients for the clinic, that I don't feel it for, more than a month or two. So that's what I'm working on now.
What I find interesting, I've been thinking about this as well a while, is that right now DPT students and soon to be fresh PTs, or even fresh PTs, are looking for more business. They don't get it in school, which is why we push a lot of that through UpDoc Media. But if you can find the right people, and obviously it's not just people, especially when you're still in a niche like Cash PT, if you find the right people that do have business-minded goals, and you give them that kind of training, and then essentially make them their own mini businesses, working for not you, but for the overall business, mm-hmm. which is a very important mindset to have. Like, if you're working for a boss versus working for the company, that's two different things. Mm-hmm. So if they can really buy in working for the company, and you can structure a deal that they're either at a 1099 with a compensation for bringing in a certain amount of business. I mean, they are essentially owners in what they bring in, with a reduced risk, with that inherent risk of being the full owner, of paying the lease, of wondering, will I get paid? And I think doing something like that could also bring in a pretty good growth potential.
Absolutely. And there's so many different ways that you can slice that arrangement, whether it's 1099 contracts or even just as employees that are on a really high hourly rate, but only paid for the time that they're actually seeing patients. So that's the situation. That's the scenario I currently have with my first PT. And then, there's also partnership tracks. And if you wanted to get, look at that, there's profit sharing models where you could still do something with like a low base salary, incentivized by profit sharing, monthly basis, quarterly, yearly. I mean, there's like 1,000 ways to do it. And I'm actively learning more and more ways to slice it. But yeah, I really do. I do think that there is a way to incentivize people that to stay even when they're really phenomenal clinicians. And I think inherently some phenomenal clinicians are going to go no matter what you do, and some are going to stay because they just don't want to take the risk and they're not driven in that direction. So again, I think just trying to identify those characteristics as best you can early on, and then setting up a system where people are like, just really, truly happy to be in that scenario, in that work scenario. They're not rushed. They're looking at their colleagues who are seeing, 20 plus patients a day and just buried in paperwork. And they think, I could go try to do this model on my own, but it's obviously more difficult to scale and do than an insurance-based practice. Do I want to take that risk? This is it's pretty cush, and I'm making X amount per hour, which is as good or better than even home health PTs are making in the area. So I think there is a way to do it, and I'm sure that 5 years from now I'd have a lot more to say about it. But that's kind of the approach I'm taking at the moment.
Let's say you keep growing. What will make you happier, to grow your businesses or to keep practicing?
You mean practicing as a clinician?
As a clinician. I
already know that I'm going to be phasing out as a clinician down to probably 1 day a week within the next couple of years. And I'm totally fine to do that, because I think I'd like to, at least for the next year or two, maintain some level of patient care. Eventually, especially if it scales, then I know I'll have to stop treating patients. I just won't have time. But right now, it's like, I'm happy with the idea about scaling down out of patient care to a large degree and really focusing on the business and marketing side of things.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'm curious to see how things scale for you. And when I started, I always loved patient care, but as I got more and more interested in business, I became more and more interested in patient relationships and how to maximize and grow those relationships versus wanting to know more techniques and more technical things,
Yeah.
So once that became so much more interesting, and I wanted to know how to scale that to bring in more people, to build more relationships. And when I started putting more of my mental resources towards that, I knew it was time to phase out.
Definitely. And I think that, the whole topic of this conversation, obviously, like with what is the scalability of the cash-based model, I know that there is a conception out there in general that the cash-based model is essentially something that only suits, solo practitioners, or maybe just a few in each practice at most. And I really think we're going to see I feel like, for one, that's a misconception. It's only based on the fact that it's a fairly new thing, especially in terms of awareness to the masses, the masses of clinicians out there as being a possibility. And the majority of those who have done it have not really worked to try to scale things up, or if they are, they haven't been in it that long. I've actively not hired anyone until just recently, because I was working on other businesses alongside of the clinic and didn't have the time or desire to do it at that time. So, but we have examples of clinics around the nation who have, more than just one or two practitioners, so it's clearly possible. And if you look at even outside of the PT realm, look at, the big franchise, the Joint, the chiropractic franchise. They have hundreds of locations around the nation, and they're cash pay. So it's certainly possible. This business model can scale, but I think that it's a matter of right now. I mean, the conception that it can't really comes from the fact that just not many people have done it, especially in the PT realm, have attempted to go bigger than just one or two practitioners. But I'm confident that it not only can scale, we're going to see it happen moving forward much more frequently because and I think that all the changes, the unfortunate changes in the insurance realm are actually going to play in favor of the cash-based model because people are having to pay higher and higher copays for our services and have higher and higher deductibles before anything's even covered in the first place. That, as awareness grows that they do have multiple options out there, there's going to be more and more people saying, okay, wait, it's going to be $50 a session, where I'm hanging out with the PTA or the tech most of the time, 2-3 times a week, or I can go see Jarod or, Carter Physiotherapy, and it's $150 a session, but it's an hour one-on-one with the doctor of physical therapy, and they only want to see me once a week. And so, the numbers are going to start to work out where those consumers who are truly looking at their options and what the true cost is, they're going to say, wow, I mean, not only is it a higher value service, I'm paying, I'm going to be paying about the same, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But I just think that those changes in the industry are going to make this model much more scalable moving forward. Yeah,
you can't say go see Jarod anymore because the first thing that popped into my head was very shiny things and a whole lot of money. I got a cold sweat a little bit as soon as you said that.
Yeah. So that, and then, but that also goes back to, I have to get out of that habit of like speaking about myself, which I didn't do so well in terms of the start with the end in mind, instead of just always being like Carter Physiotherapy, and our therapists and not me.
Got to be the company, not the person.
Exactly. Yeah. That's something that, hopefully someone out there listening or multiple people out there, they start truly with the end in mind. They don't make that mistake, because as I started out, it was me, and not too long after that, I started realizing this is going to be a problem down the road. But yeah, definitely start with the end in mind.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cash-Based Practice Podcast. If you liked what you heard here today, we have some extremely important things we want to send you. First, a quick start guide to cash-based physical therapy and Medicare. This free ebook will provide the primary rules and regulations surrounding this confusing but important topic. Secondly, we want to share with you the 5 characteristics common to all successful cash-based practices. Find out the vital things Jarod has learned from years of interviewing cash practice owners and running his own successful cash practice. As one of our listeners, we want to give you all this information absolutely free. You can get it right now by going to drjarodcarter.com/success. Again, that's drjarodcarter.com/success. Go there now to get your copies, and we'll see you next time.